Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse in yet another breakdown. Today, we will be breaking down and giving our initial thoughts on episode 7 of the 3rd season of House of the Dragon. Of course, House of the Dragon being a prequel series to Game of Thrones that takes place during a time known as the Dance of the Dragons from the book Fire and Blood. This breakdown, and all of the other ones as well, will contain some spoilers from the source material. So this is your spoiler warning now, you have been warned. And the title for episode 7 of the 3rd season being The Dragon in the Winter. Now, before we get started with the actual episode, there are two sides to this war. Team Green and Team Black. If you wish to choose your side and represent them until the very end, feel free to check out our merch that was made just for you to pick your side in this unforgettable conflict. And remember to use code DRAGON for 25% off your order. Anyways though, this episode begins with Helaena, clearly in the middle of a dream sequence, as we see her just outside of the Red Keep as she stands by a horse and a carriage. The gates leading outside open up on their own as the sun seems to be shining right down onto Helaena, which is reminiscent of Alicent telling her that the sun will shine down on them as they escape. We then start hearing someone calling to Helaena in the background. And it turns out to be Rhaenyra, who wakes Helaena up from her dreams. Again, we have had a good idea since season 1 that Helaena was a dreamer, much like other Targaryens in the past, such as Aegon the Conqueror and Daenerys the Dreamer. But it was officially confirmed in the previous episode. Rhaenyra has woken Helaena up to try and gather any information that she may know from her. She does this because she knows that Helaena is a dreamer and thinks that she knows every possible outcome for the future. And at first, she tries to act nice and sisterly, as these two are sisters, but then she ends up just stopping the act and gets more aggressive, even though Helaena has not dreamt anything regarding Rhaenyra or her rule, as far as we know. This is somewhat symbolic to how Rhaenyra is slowly losing her grip on the throne, while also shifting to be a bit more cruel, going along with what Team Green labeled her as, and what she was titled in the books by many, being Rhaenyra the Cruel and King Maegor with teats. The two also talk about dragons, and Helaena does say that she wished that she rode on Dreamfire more, but it got to be too much. This likely is showing how she fears violence and where this entire conflict has gone, but also how her own mental state is falling apart. Helaena in the books was extremely close with her dragon, Dreamfire, claiming her at the age of only 11 years old, and it was said that she rode the dragon quite often, as taking to the skies on Dreamfire was her greatest joy in life. All while this is happening, Helaena is cross-stitching something again. However, this time around, it appears to be that of ships under fire. So this is her likely stitching the Battle of the Gullet. We then cut to Harrenhal, where we see Aemond training with his sword, known as Blackfire. This is a Valyrian steel blade, and this is the sword that Aegon the Conqueror wielded himself, and it has been passed down from king to king. And in the near future, it will be passed down to someone who rebels against House Targaryen themselves, known as Daemon Blackfire. Anyways though, what appears to be Alicent walks in and reunites with her son. These two then end up kissing and then getting together in an absolutely disgusting scene. But it turns out to be just a vision, and it was actually Alice Rivers the entire time. But as soon as he actually realizes it was Alice, he freaks out and leaves the room, only to be met by the real Alicent, who is now arriving at Harrenhal right after. We then briefly cut to the Rivermen and the Winter Wolves, and once again we can see all of the different houses that make up this massive army. consisting of houses such as Blackwood, Tully, Mallister, and many others. At the very front of the army, we can see Roderick Dustin, aka Roddy the Ruin, holding Criston Cole's head on a spike as they march towards Tumbleton. And speaking of Tumbleton, that is where we head to next, as Gwaine Hightower returns to inform Ormond of the massive force of Rivermen and Winter Wolves that are marching straight for them. After hearing of Cole's defeat, Ormond also sort of mocks him here, saying that Cole died in the mud for nothing. Ormond knows that they do not have to worry about the dragons attacking them, as they are practically holding Tumbleton and its citizens hostage. However, the forces that march towards them outnumber them greatly. And if they were to attack Tumbleton straight on, the Greens would likely lose. However, Ormond is still confident in victory, and says that he now has a piece to the puzzle that will make Rhaenyra crumble. This is obviously referring to the fact that he had her hand, Corlys Velaryon, captured in the previous episode, while also trying to sway him to their side in this one. But it could also be hinting at the fact that he is also working to turn the dragonseeds against Rhaenyra as well. We then cut to the Vale as Daemon and Caraxes arrive at the Eyrie, once again seeing the return of that iconic moon door. But also, as Daemon walks in, we can see Lady Jane Arryn with another woman. This is very similar to the books, as Jane was said to prefer the company of other women. And the woman with her here is also likely Jessamine Redfort, who was described as Jane's dear companion in the source material. Anyways though, Daemon is here to seek information on Rhaena, who has once again been sighted in the Vale. During this conversation, Jane says that Rhaena is living among nettles and sheep. This is obviously a reference to the character from the source material that Rhaena has been mixed with, and that character being Nettles, of course. Nettles was a dragon seed just like Hugh, Ulf, and Adam, and she was the one to claim Sheepstealer in the book, while Rhaena had her own dragon known as Morning. Jane does say that she will report this all to Rhaenyra, but Daemon tells her to just give him a little more time so that he can meet with Rhaena one last time. We then cut to Adam and Baela as they are at yet another farmstead that has been burnt down by Vhagar. I have mentioned it in a previous breakdown, but this destruction of the Riverlands is something that happens in the book, albeit it is not just Vhagar alone. It is also Aemond doing it. Adam tries to talk to Baela about her possibly speaking with Rhaenyra or Daemon about legitimizing him and his brother Alan. But as we have seen ourselves, and as Baela says, her relationship with Rhaenyra is not great right now. She has not spoken to her since Jace died, and keeps sending her on these endless scouting missions so that she doesn't even have to see her. Adam is not seeking glory alone like Ulf is. He just wants his family name, especially if he were to marry someone. And that is when Baela basically tells him about Alan and her, which clearly shatters Adam's heart, as it was obvious that he also had a thing for Baela. This is all kind of crazy still because Jace has not been dead for that long at all. And yet, we are seeing what could very well be a love triangle form around Baela already. So I don't know if her relationship with Rhaenyra will get any better if she finds out about this. The two are eventually cut off by a dragon in the distance, which appears to be Caraxes. We then cut back to Harrenhal as Aemond reunites with the real Alicent. She tells him of her journey from King's Landing to here and says that Sir Adrian Redfort is the reason that she made it here safely, claiming that he remained loyal to them throughout everything. Obviously, this whole thing is a ploy, as Adrian is loyal to Rhaenyra and is actively serving as one of her queen's guards. But with this news, news, Aemond goes out to where the weirwood tree is to meet with Adrian and thank him. However, this all ends with Aemond killing Adrian out of nowhere, causing the assassination plan to fail, but also this is yet another character killed off before they were meant to be killed off. At least when comparing it to the source material. As in the book, Adrian Redfort was one of only 3 people to return to Dragonstone alongside Rhaenyra, where he ultimately met his fate after they discovered Aegon was waiting for them there. But now, with Adrian dead in the show, Alicent is now stuck at Harrenhal alone and forced to take up the assassination task herself. We then return to Tumbleton, as Aemond and Daemon meet with their new prisoner, Corlys Velaryon. As I said earlier, Aemond sort of tries to sway Corlys to their side, or at least away from Rhaenyra and the Targaryens as a whole, as he once again displays what seems to be hatred towards the Targaryens and their ways. He questions why Corlys serves people like that, even though his wife, Rhaenys, was a Targaryen herself. She too ended up facing a fate caused by their own ways, at least in Aemond's eyes. The way that he is trying to sway Corlys is kind of strange here, because not only is Daemon, who is fighting with Aemond and also sitting right next to him here, a Targaryen himself, but Corlys himself is of Valyrian descent as well, the same as the Targaryens, and his wife and his son were also Targaryens who had their own dragons. So obviously this goes absolutely nowhere. Daemon wonders how this will help them when the winter wolves are clawing at their gates. And once again, we can see a little glimpse into Aemond's true colors, but he restrains himself this time. Losing his appetite for the meal he had in front of him, he then goes for some vegetables, as he references how he must take up the diet of the people of Noth. Noth, also known as the ancient Isle of the Butterflies, is an island in the Summer Sea, where its people, often referred to as the Peaceful People, worshipped a deity known as the Lord of Harmony, which forbids them from killing anything, even animals, resulting in them only eating fruits and vegetables. Noth is also the homeland of a character from the original series, being Missandei. Anyways though, Corlys gets pretty sick of all of this, especially with the mention of his wife and her death, and just wishes to be returned to his cell. However, before he can leave, Aemond calls him back as he lifts up his knife. This is clearly what leads into Alan being delivered the box that contains Corlys's finger and ring later in the episode. After the meeting with Aemond and Corlys, Gwaine and Daemon meet with one another, and both talk about how much they dislike Aemond and his plans. They do bring up surrendering, as they see that Aemond is likely leading all of them and their army to certain death. And Gwaine suggests that Daemon just fly away onto Saurian, but Daemon is meant to be king, and he does not want to just abandon his own people. But then again, he is made to do all of this and act as king, even though he clearly does not want to be king. And this is all because of Aemond and his plans. And that is exactly why Daemon says that he could care less if Rhaenyra had the crown or not. We then cut back to King's Landing as Rhaenyra and her council meet once more. Torrhen reports on how his house has been victim to vandalism and how he is being blamed for everything regarding the gold, as he calls Rhaenyra out for putting him on the council just to be a scapegoat. Rhaenyra tries to say that he has not done anything to fix the gold issue, where he brings up the fact that he suggested a tax, but it fell on deaf ears. This whole idea of a tax was present in the books, as Rhaenyra called for one herself, and it is one of the reasons that the small folk ended up turning on her in the source material as well. So I do wonder if it will get to the point where she does finally agree to do a tax. Rhaenyra then questions if any news has returned from Corlys or Daemon, which there has been none, of course. As we know, Corlys has been captured and Daemon has gone out looking for Rhaena. And once again, Sabbatha Frey is seeking Harrenhal, and it seems that is the only reason that she is here. Rhaenyra just tells her to go back home to the twins and go take over Harrenhal, in hopes that Adrian and Alicent's mission has been a success. The council is then interrupted by Adam and Baela, who have come to report that they have seen Sheepstealer and that the dragon does have a rider still. This leads into Rhaenyra and Mysaria meeting, and Mysaria suggesting that Daemon has deceived Rhaenyra and lied to her about Sheepstealer's rider being dead. This whole concept of Mysaria putting the thought of Daemon betraying Rhaenyra into the queen's head is something that happens throughout this entire episode, and what ultimately leads into them getting together after discussing Daemon's lies again later in the episode. This whole storyline of Rhaenyra getting with Mysaria is a complete opposite to what happens in the book, as it is actually Daemon who continues his relationship with her, behind Rhaenyra's back. And that is what ultimately causes the two to drift from one another and lead into the battle above the God's Eye. Rhaenyra then decides to take matters into her own hands as she orders for Adam to prepare to go out with her and Syrax on his dragon, Seasmoke. We then cut to Aegon and his little crew as they make their way to a ship that will take them to Braavos. They also do mention one of the other free cities in Essos known as Volantis. However, their venture to a ship is cut off as a massive group of small folk are fleeing, as an army made up of House Mutin soldiers marches their way. House Mutin is a house from the Riverlands, and much like House Tully, their house's sigil also features a fish. In order to get away from the army that approaches, they decide to return to Rook's Rest. But as they approach, the people from Rook's Rest are also seen fleeing, as the Mutins also march there, seeking out Tywin Lannister. As we know from the previous episode, Corlys discovered his survival and informed Alan of it, who then likely told Rhaenyra. Aegon grows sick of running and does not want to die as a man posing as some sort of peasant. He wants to make a final stand and die as a king, right next to his dragon, Sunfire. So he decides to stay and hold his ground, alongside Tywin Lannister, who the army is looking for specifically. Larys says that he will be no help to them if a battle is coming, and decides to leave. However, before he leaves, he says that his mission will be making sure that Aegon is remembered throughout history and song. We then cut to Harrenhal as Alicent, Aemond, and Alice eat together and catch up a bit. Alicent is confused on who Alice even is, or how the two even met. So Aemond tells her that Alice is responsible for saving his life, and she did it out of her own free will, as she serves no one, but of course her own interests. Aemond says that he wishes to make Harrenhal his seat of power, as they plan to bide their time here, and hopefully in the future hatch the eggs that Alice showed Aemond in the previous episode that come from the dragon Dreamfire, in hopes that Alice and Aemond's children will become dragon lords themselves and take on the dragons that hatch from the box, as Aemond says that a new line of unsullied kings awaits. Now, there is clearly a lot of tension here, so Alice gets up and tells Aemond that they are out of wood, which of course causes him to go and chop some more for them, leading to only these two meeting, as Alice tells him that Alicent has come to do him a great evil, obviously referring to the entire assassination plot. Aemond does not believe her and tells her to watch her tongue. And of course, in response to this, Alice makes a remark that all Targaryen boys want the same thing. This is obviously referencing the fact that Aemond has grown a very strange obsession and attraction to his own mother. which we all know is a sort of common theme among the Targaryens, which also leads into why so many people of Westeros come to hate them. Anyways though, while these two meet, Alicent tries to find something to take care of Aemond with. So she goes out to the weirwood tree where Adrian was killed and left. She ends up taking his dagger before sighting what I believe to be Nightshade. This is the same poisonous plant that Helaena mentioned in a previous episode to her daughter, Jacaerys. This all leads into Alicent mixing it into some spiced wine and giving it to her own son, Aemond, in a scene that started off in a very similar way to his vision from earlier in the episode. But thankfully, it did not go that route this time around, and he does end up drinking the wine and being poisoned, as he then retreats to Alice for help. Now, of course, she did warn him that Alicent was there to harm him, and he didn't listen, and now she has to save his life again, which is exactly why she calls him an idiot. After poisoning her own son, Alicent is obviously forced to flee Harrenhal, and it appears that she may be doing it all alone and on foot, which I have a bad feeling about. We then cut to Rhaenyra and Sheepstealer, who get ambushed and forced to land by Daemon and Caraxes. He has come to see why she has returned to the skies over the Vale and the Riverlands, as she reveals that she is hunting Vhagar, in hopes to either kill her and regain some of Rhaenyra's trust, or to just die in the process and be forgotten. While they are discussing though, Rhaenyra and Adam end up finding them and arriving with their dragons, Syrax and Seasmoke. Daemon tries to save his daughter Rhaenyra from any sort of punishment and tells her to just run and leave Sheepstealer behind. But she is ultimately caught by Adam and brought face to face with Rhaenyra, who finally discovers who was actually the rider of Sheepstealer. The dragons have a crazy amount of tension here, and as soon as Rhaenyra takes Rhaena, Sheepstealer absolutely loses it, and ends up getting attacked by all three of the dragons here. Syrax gets some hits on Sheepstealer, but gets pretty injured in the process, which leads into Rhaenyra and Rhaena riding off on her, only to be followed by Adam and Seasmoke, after Daemon says that he will finish it. He orders Caraxes to kill Sheepstealer, and they nearly tear this dragon apart. But Daemon is then knocked off of his dragon's back, and Sheepstealer takes this opportunity to just run away. Now, we could see him again, but I also would not be surprised if we don't, as him and his rider's fate in the book was widely unknown, as they sort of just vanished after leaving Rhaenyra's service. There are a few theories out there, such as a cult forming around them in the Vale among the mountain clans, and that being an origin for the Burned Men tribe, but then again, their fate has never been confirmed. Heading back to King's Landing as Mysaria meets with Sylvie inside of the throne room. Sylvie is of course someone who has worked for Mysaria in the past, and was someone who was close with Aemond, as we have seen in the previous seasons. Mysaria tries to promise Sylvie that she will see to it that the queen hears of the small folks' issues when she is feeling more accommodating. This is where Sylvie realizes that Mysaria has truly changed, and has turned into just another one of the nobles, and she makes sure to tell Mysaria that too. We then see Adam and Rhaenyra return to King's Landing on Dragonback, landing inside of the dragon pit, which is of course completely destroyed by the time of Game of Thrones. Rhaenyra orders for Rhaena to be confined to a cell, as she does not want to see her. Now, with Syrax's injuries following her fight with Sheepstealer, it is likely that she will remain inside of the dragon pit so that her wounds can be healed. This in itself is a little hint for a massive event that will likely take place in the 4th season of the show, and an event that is teased twice in this episode. and that event is known as the storming of the Dragon Pit, and Syrax is present for that event. But seeing that it's hinted at in a grander scale later in the episode, I will touch on it a bit more then. We then head to Rhaenyra's room as she stares at the skull of the man that Daemon claimed was Sheepstealer's rider, while her handmaiden Alyssa Massey braids her hair. Daemon returns and meets with Rhaenyra, and you can already see the two drifting apart a little bit here as Rhaenyra decides to keep Alinda Massey in the room with them. Rhaenyra tells Daemon that she's been living in a lie, thinking that the person responsible for Jace's death was dead. And Daemon says that he did it to protect his daughter, who he finally admits he has neglected for far too long. This all leads into Rhaenyra returning to Mysaria again, as I mentioned before. However, before she does that, she does throw the shepherd's skull into the fire. Not only does this display her frustration with Daemon and her realizing the truth, but I can also see this as a bit of foreshadowing for where she will end up. But I don't really want to get into too much detail about that. We then see Baela meet with Rhaena, who clearly still blames herself not only for Jace's death, but for stripping Baela's own future away from her, as of course she was set to becoming queen. But in a bittersweet moment, Baela just sits down next to Rhaena and comforts her. Clearly, Baela knows that she did not do it on purpose and still views her as her sister. Back inside of a dream sequence, we see Helaena having a vision of her giving birth to a child, likely to be Rhaenyra Targaryen, as they take her child away, likely to be slain. I do think that this is hinting at the child's inevitable fate, but I do not think it will happen exactly like this. I have a feeling that Rhaenyra will pass during childbirth, which will then cause Helena's full-on spiral, rather than the child being taken away and slain like this, and rather than the child being killed off by an angry mob like he was in the source material. We continue this dream sequence as we then see Helaena on Dragonback for the very first time on screen, as a massive crowd of people rush towards her and her dragon inside of the dragon pit. She gives us one of the best Dracaryses we have ever heard and burns the incoming mob. This is the major hint pointing towards the storming of the dragon pit that I mentioned earlier. This was an event that happened in the source material, where a frantic mob of small folk were incited by a man known as the Shepherd to break into the dragon pit, and it would ultimately serve as one of the most devastating events during the dance and for House Targaryen as a whole, and is the exact reason that the dragon pit is destroyed by the time of Game of Thrones. Now, as for the dragon that Helaena is riding, we are meant to believe that it is her dragon Dreamfire. But the dragon we see here looks completely different to the glimpses of Dreamfire that we have seen in previous seasons. So either they decided to go and change Dreamfire's design, or Helaena is riding a completely different dragon during this vision. I mean, if it is Dreamfire, it certainly does not look like her. If anything, it resembles that more of Tyraxes, who was also present for the storming of the dragon pit. Anyways though, in her final vision during this dream sequence, we see Helaena and her two children living on a farm and tending to some chickens. This is exactly what she told Alicent that she wished to do in the future in a previous episode. But this happy vision does not last very long, as a large blizzard comes and it begins snowing. I take this as a reference to the Long Night, and the White Walkers of course, but also the fact that Helaena cannot escape what is to come. Cutting back to Aegon and Tyland as they are finally met by the Mutant forces, who tell Tyland that he will die with his ears still attached as long as he tells them where Rhaenyra's gold is. The two refuse to bend the knee and refuse to surrender, which is when Aegon decides to draw his sword and give off an absolutely incredible and glorious speech. And as he does so, the mutant men begin backing up in fear. But it is not because of Aegon himself. It is because none other than Sunfire has returned. Reflecting that of his own rider Aegon, the two both have extremely damaged and mangled, burnt faces. Aegon reunites with his dragon at long last and has Sunfire burn down the mutant forces. This was easily my favorite part of the episode. This whole event is somewhat similar to what happens in the books, at least in regards to Sunfire, as the mutants were tasked with retaking Rook's Rest, which is where they found the injured dragon, and attempted to finish it off, where they would obviously fail and all be killed by Sunfire, who would then return to Aegon afterwards. We then cut to Ulf White, just outside of Tumbleton, as it is revealed that he is meeting with Aemond Hightower. Aemond brings up the news that he heard that Daemon struck Ulf in the streets of King's Landing, and he uses this as a way to sway Ulf to their side, saying that men like him deserve respect and should be allowed to enjoy themselves with simple things such as visiting a tavern. Ulf says that Aemond had promised him a lordship and a castle the last time that they met. So clearly, they have been meeting for quite some time already, just off screen. As Ulf brings up Honeyholt. Honeyholt is the seat of House Beesbury, and it is in the Reach. This is obviously the castle that Ulf wants, but Aemond says that Honeyholt is a trifle, and instead offers him up Driftmark itself. So now Ulf has completely swapped sides and has joined Team Green, which also means they now have another dragon on their side technically, and that dragon being Silverwing, of course. Now, I don't think that this alliance is going to go as Ulf thinks it is, but as of now, he says that those that used to laugh at him and disrespect him will now burn, which is where this episode ends off. Overall, this was yet another episode that focused mostly on developing more things. But I will say that the dragon action that we got in this one was pretty cool. However, I am a little shocked that we didn't even get the start of the Battle of Tumbleton in this one. But that hopefully means that it will take up a majority of the finale. I will also honestly say that this episode didn't exactly feel that much like a penultimate episode, and definitely had its issues. Some of the changes bothered me, and some of the storylines that don't need to be are continued to be dragged on. And I really hope that does not mean that they will continue into the finale and downplay yet another big event, which is how I felt about Butcher's Ball. I will add though that regardless of some of my issues with this episode, and despite being someone who is on Team Black, Aegon was easily the standout in this episode for me. Regardless of everything though, I do still think it was an okay watch, and as usual it had its great performances, scores, action, and visuals. If I had to rate the episode, I think I would give it another 7 out of 10. But yeah, that about does it for this episode, from me at least. But of course, I would like to hear your thoughts on it as well, so make sure to leave them down below. With that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed our breakdown and review on this episode, don't forget to give it a like. And with that, we will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the Nerdy Multiverse.